Hello everybody. Today I'm going to show you how to set up Hyperledger Composer for Mac. This is built upon the Hyperledger Fabric and is a great way to test the viability of a private enterprise blockchain solution for your business. It's pretty intuitive once we get it set up, but in order to do so we have to download a few tools. The first one being Xcode, which is found in the App Store. And if you've done any sort of development on Mac, you know that this is pretty essential. If you haven't downloaded it before, beware, it takes up to almost 20 minutes sometimes. It's a pretty big package. So once you get that downloaded, you can go to the Docker downloads page, which is another prerequisite. We'll go down to the stable channel and get Docker for Mac. This is a DMG file that will be opened and you can install there. And then finally, we need the Node version manager, which is a great way to manage all the different versions of Node on your Mac. And particularly for Hyperledger Composer, it's important because at this moment, Hyperledger Composer does not run on later versions of Node, and you'll have all sorts of dependency issues when you try to get it up and running. So to install NVM, let's go down to this install script. Take that to terminal. You can do it at any directory and execute that. It's going to take a while, so we'll go ahead and fast forward. Okay, so it is downloaded, and we can check this download by typing command v nvm, and that should return nvm if it properly installed. Now that we've checked to make sure nvm is installed correctly, we need to install the long-term support version of Node. We can do this by typing nvm install --lts. And this should be version 6.11.3 as of this date. When this finishes installing, you can check your Node version by typing node -- version, and it should be version 6.11.3. Lastly, we should download the Visual Studio code. I know you may not prefer this editor as your first choice, but it does have a nice Composer plugin which highlights the code written within the Composer environment. So download that for Mac, and once you have it downloaded, open it up and come to the View command palette and type in extensions and click on the install extensions. Over here we'll type in Composer, and you can see right here is the Hyperledger Composer plugin. So what you'll do is, I've already got it installed, but since you don't, just press install, and then you should be able to see proper syntax highlighting when developing within Composer. Okay, so once you have all the prereqs installed, let's check once more to make sure that our system is running correctly for Hyperledger Composer. This is super important. If you don't check this, you'll probably be running into dependency problems down the road, and it's just a pain. So make sure you get these requirements listed here correctly. In most cases, you can just check the versions by typing the name of the plugin or package -- version. And to check your operating system, this is probably obvious to some, but we can click About This Mac, and it'll tell us that we have version 10.12.6. So I have checked already that everything is supported, but once again we can say something like get -- version, and it'll tell us that we're running 2.10.1. So go ahead and get those all checked out, and when you're done with that, we can start installing the packages that are necessary to get this up and running. So the first one, and also before we get going, I might mention that you should not be running the sudo command when installing any of these packages. This is unnecessary and will cause some problems down the road. So do not use sudo. So let's npm install global composer CLI or client. This is going to make a lot more sense as we get further down in this tutorial. All of these packages are going to be working together to help you build your RESTful API and your application. Anyways, we've got this all installed, and the next package that we want is npm install g generator Hyperledger Composer. Next, we need to install the RESTful server that we're going to later use. So we'll do npm install global composer rest server. And finally, we'll download Yeoman, Yeoman, however you say that. Yo. Oh, forgot to install npm install gyo. Okay, so now that we have everything installed, we need to make sure that our environment is set up. So we'll kill off all the Docker containers. This is only a necessary step if you had Docker installed previously. We'll run 3 commands here. So I have no containers running. Okay, so our environment is completely set up to go. So what we're going to do is create a directory in the home path called Fabric Tools. This file already exists, so I'm going to go ahead and delete it just for the sake of the tutorial. So let's make it again. Okay, now we're going to cd into that. Now that we are in the Fabric Tools directory, we're going to run the following command. This will download the tools, and then we're going to say unzip and let's clear this out. Now we can run all of the necessary scripts to get our runtime environment going. So if this is the first time using Composer, we need to download the fabric. So /download fabric. Okay, clear that. Now let's start the fabric. Alright, so now that we have started the fabric, we're going to get a business network up and going. We can get a bunch of sample networks from a GitHub repository, but first let's get out of the fabric tools. So we're in our home directory, and we're going to clone github.com/hyperledger/composer sample networks. So let's clone that. And now what we're going to do is take one of those sample networks and put it into our own repository to work with. So we will copy recursively. Let's see, composer sample networks, and we'll go packages, and then let's see what we have. We have several choices. We're going to go with the perishable network, and we're going to call this directory just perishable network. Okay, so let's cd into the perishable network, and you can see we have a bunch of files. Now to more easily see these and edit them, let's go over to the Visual Studio and open this directory up. So we're going to open folder, go to perishable network, and open. You can see all the files here. So it's all set up for us at this point. You can do a little browsing through the code, but we're also going to go through that in a later video. So we'll come back here. We are in perishable network, so what we're going to do is npm install, which will look into the package.json and install all of our dependencies necessary. And if all goes well, you should see this dependency tree downloaded, and you can check if you're not a usual npm node user. You can see all these modules in the node modules directory, so we can go in there and list out all of the packages that we've installed. So when we ran npm install, we actually created a business network already, and this happened through the command pre-publish, where you can see we are composer, archive, create, and then our business network over here. So I just wanted to show you how you do this from the client perspective. So we're in perishable network, and what we're going to do is create a new business network under the same protocol. So let's first look at the one we have, which is in dist. We have perishable network.bna. So what we're going to do is come out of that and say composer, archive, create. The name of the business network is going to be in dist, and it's going to be called perishables. We'll just call it that, so it's a different name, .bna. The source type is directory, and the source name is here. So let's execute that, and we can see that the command succeeded. Alright, so now that we've created our business network, let's go on to the Composer Playground, which is found at this link here, and import our BNA. We'll drop here to upload and click perishables.bna, which is in the dist folder that we had just talked about. So let's open that and import it. You can see that we successfully imported this BNA file, and it's all visualized here for us. This is the README, which will take you through the steps that you need to take in order to demo this, but I'm going to actually do this for you to show you the possibilities and also to kind of familiarize you with the code that underlies this business network without going too technical. So let's start with the model file. This is essentially you can think of as database schemas for the different nodes within this network. So you can see there are several definitions. For example, we have a grower, a shipper, and an importer. And you'll see this over on the Participants tab. So that models file is going to define everything here in this left column. Next, we'll go to the script file, which if you've been involved at all with blockchain, you know what a smart contract is, or at least have heard of it. This is essentially the smart contract file, which is written in JavaScript. I'm not going to dive deep into the code, but you can see that this is what defines the logic behind this whole business network. And we'll see it in action shortly. And finally, we have the access control, or permissions.acl file. This defines who can see what within this business network. In this particular case, everyone can see everything, but obviously you can change this to your desire when you're creating your own network. Alright, so that's the basics. Those are the basic files you need to know about. Now let's go through a quick demo. We'll do this by going to the Test tab. And first, I think we should look at the contract that we're actually executing under. But you can see we don't have any participants or assets defined yet. We have to create those. Luckily, with this example, there's also a script that we can execute called setup demo. This is going to populate all these fields. You can see the transaction was successful, and we come down to transactions, all transactions, and you can see this that we executed just now. You can also see that there are now participants as well as assets. Before we look at the assets, let's give some money to the participants. So the importer is going to be the one paying for the goods. So what we're going to do is change this account balance here. But before we do so, let's take one more look at the transactions. You can see that there's only one transaction so far, and that was setting up the network. So we come over to the importer, click on the edit, and we're going to give the importer 10,000 units of currency, whatever that might be. So we'll press update, and you might say, so what's the difference between this and just a normal database? What you don't see happening behind the scenes is the transaction that we just submitted for the append to this participant in the network. And you can see here by viewing the record that we gave this participant an account balance of 10,000 units. So once we have that set up, we don't need to give anyone else money at this point. We can come look at the assets themselves. So looking at the contract, we can see that in this scenario, we have some sort of perishable good selling at a unit price of 0.5. We can also see that this perishable good must arrive to the importer at a minimum temperature of 2 or a maximum temperature of 10. If the temperature of the perishable goods is outside of these bounds, what happens is there's a penalty in the price that the grower will receive from the importer. So the factors that we're looking at is 0.2 and 0.1, and I'll show you how this works in just a moment. But first, let's check out, what are we actually selling? We can look at the shipment asset, and you can see the ID as ship _001. Keep that in mind for later. And we're selling bananas, and we're selling 5,000 units, 5,000 bananas. So now that we've looked at all this, we can submit a transaction. We're going to submit a temperature reading transaction type. And for the sake of this example, we're going to say 12 degrees Celsius, which is actually outside of the temperature bounds that were defined in the contract. So what happens here? Let me just come over to the side to explain this. So right now, the price per unit is 0.5. Now, since we went 2 degrees Celsius over the maximum, we have a penalty factor of 0.1, and we'll say 2 because it's 2 degrees over. So that's going to actually equal a new price of 0.3, whatever currency per unit or per banana. So in the end, if we've got 5,000 bananas at a price of 0.3, that should cost a total of $1,500 for the importer, and the grower is going to be receiving $1,500. So let's go ahead and submit this. We will say ship 001 because that's the ID of the shipment, and we're going to submit it. So let's take note at this point, the grower still has an account balance of 0, and the importer still has an account balance of 10,000. Now what we can do is submit a transaction, and this time we're going to say the shipment has been received. So we're sending in that shipment that was 2 degrees over the maximum temperature and should come out to $1,500. So we'll say ship again, ship 001, and we're going to submit that. So we've submitted the transaction, and we'll see how this all played out. First, we'll look at the shipment, and if we drop this down, we can see here under the temperature readings that we've got an appended data store, and you can see the transaction that we submitted. And then if we go over to the grower now has 1,500 in his or her account. Likewise, the importer has decreased the account balance from 10,000 to 8,500. So that's basically how this business network works, and you can obviously get way more complicated with this, and you can customize anything you'd like. For example, you could submit something with a different unit price, a different penalty factor, so on and so forth. In a subsequent video, I'll be going through how to actually write the code behind this business network. So as we saw in all of these different files, you actually have to write these things out. So check back for that in the future, and I hope you learned a lot here. Thanks.